Indians are open to multiple truths. And this is the freedom that comes when we aren't so tied to that concept. There is one truth. This is the truth. You don't accept it, you have to be cancelled. Okay? I mean, that's silly. It's completely un-Indian. At least it's a Western thing. Let's not import it here.
So we don't have to have this modern conception of cultural globalization where all of us need a McDonald's, where all of us need to have a particular type of political, social, cultural governance that gives us the claim to modernity. That there are in fact different types of organizing our social life that we can look back into our past and legitimize, not only for ourselves, but this project is equally important for the world around us. How do we exist in a plural, multicultural, multipolar world? Well, if you look back at Western history, I don't think you get a lot of good answers to that question.
हमारे यहाँ महाभारत में कहा गया है कि अगर विश्व में कुछ हुआ है और ह्यूमैनिटी में कुछ हुआ है तो वो महाभारत में है, और अगर वो महाभारत में नहीं है तो वो हुआ नहीं. With that context, I welcome all of you to this panel where Pooja very sweetly described mythology and was wondering where the blurring between mythology and history happens. So with a quick context on saying that mythology, or what we call mythology, and by the way, every one of us on this panel hugely, hotly debate and disagree with the word mythology, and I will let them speak for themselves, but I do as well. This is basically our civilizational memory. It's our blood DNA. It's happened somewhere, sometime for it to be present in our tales, in our blood, and in our ancient wisdom and scriptures. Having said that, there is also the space that historically documented history occupies, events of which we have a human memory, right? Why I love my panel so much, and here's where my first question is because I have Brijesh and I have Tarun, who have both written historical fiction. Their stories are grounded in documented, scripted, remembered recent history, and then they've built up on that. And while I have Amish and I have Ame, who have both written about mythological fantasy and fiction, where their stories start from the familiar or from the lore, from that which we've grown up on, and then they move into what some might call fantasy, I call imagination. But either which ways, and here's a question actually for all four of you to start with. For all four of you who work in this space, whether it's historicals and what actually happened, Itihasa, or what we call Itihasa, which is Ramayana and Mahabharata and the epics, where do, and you all are bestsellers, I've read your books, they are fabulous. So the question for you is, and I know that Amay combines actually both history and fantasy, but the question is, where do those lines blur? Where does fact stop and fiction begin? Where does history stop and fantasy begin? Where does mythology stop and the mystery begin? And what's your process around this? How do you even do this? So do you want to go in an order? We are sitting in alphabetical order, but take your pick. Yeah. Thanks,
I begin with a serious objection to the term mythology. This epistemic violence on our cultural consciousness is a British project. And this was scientific vandalism which was practiced on us. Now, when you say lines were drawn, the lines were drawn by Macaulay, by Cunningham, and by Archaeological Society of India, and by this whole British project of showing that this is an inferior race which needs to be salvaged, which cannot rule itself, which does not have intellect, which does not have glory, and hence it's the white man's burden to come as knights in shining armor and save them. Now this was the project. Now look at everything what they did, right from, codification of our history into periods where rather than looking at a syncretic aspect, they simply made it into Hindu, Muslim and British periods, or the theory of martial races, or labeling certain tribes as criminal, or the forest laws, or their policies of taxation, wherein they finished Indian industry and agriculture. It was all scientific, systematic, epistemic vandalism. And I think it should be a national project to decolonize our minds, and we should begin with not calling it mythology. When you refer to the Greeks, you don't call it mythology, you call it rational literature. When you refer to us, that is why everything that was Indian, right from the Ashoka pillar to everything, was denigrated. That, oh, this is accidental metallurgy. Oh, or all knowledge which was passed from India, right from numerals to algebra, was later on ascribed to somebody else rather than Indians. So there was a systematic, project, and we need to, first of all, almost in Derrida's terms, deconstruct this. And after deconstructing this, we need to form our own theories. And people may call us stupid, and people may denigrate us, and people may think that we believe in, nukes and vimanas and stuff like that. But see, there was something there which may not be flying. But there are things in our past which were not written down. And just because it was not written down, it doesn't mean that there was nothing happening there. So I begin with this serious objection. And when you say where the lines were drawn, I want to redraw the lines.
So just for reference, Brijesh and I have had all-night arguments on this for the last 15 years. Though we both agree and we're both saying the same thing, but we must argue on exactly this point, and we feel very strongly about it. Amish, you were saying.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with Brijesh ji. And I would see it at a few levels. One lie that was told to us is that our ancestors didn't have a scientific basis, and if they did have any stories or philosophies, oh, we were an oral culture, Indians, we didn't write, somehow the British came and saved us, which is utter bullshit actually. According to the National Mission of Manuscripts, now they've raised their estimates of the number of manuscripts. The ancient Greeks, there are some 20 to 25,000 handwritten manuscripts that survive. And ancient Greece was the mother culture of Europe. And that's a good number. In those days, writing by hand, you couldn't print books as easily. The number of Sanskrit handwritten manuscripts that survive till today, 4.5 million with an M. That's more than the rest of the ancient world combined. And the National Mission of Manuscripts is saying perhaps there are many more that have not been done. So the fact that our ancestors didn't write is bullshit. They wrote a hell of a lot. And a lot of it was not necessarily just religious or spiritual scriptures. Science, mathematics, chemistry, medicine, in so many places, right? The achievers were our ancestors. The underachievers are us. We are unworthy descendants of really kick-ass ancestors. I think that's the first point. The second point, I think our ancestors had a much wiser approach to the truth. Extremism begins with that one line, that this is the truth. And if you don't accept the truth, you're going to go to hell. God himself will punish you and he will burn you for eternity. Why will God do that? We never had that approach. Our approach was, as said in the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one, but the wise speak it as many. So there are multiple interpretations of the truth, which is what intuitive liberalism is. Which means that we opened the space for multiple stories, multiple philosophies. There's a wonderful book that Brijesh ji has just released, and I lived in Odisha, so I knew the story. Okay, on King Khadavela. And this is the interpretations of history that can happen. Most modern Indians would have heard of King Ashok. Why? Because our history books taught us about it. But there was perhaps very valid reasons that our ancestors actually never wrote of Ashok. They wrote of other kings. They never wrote of Ashok, and I think there was a reason for it. And Khadavela was this great Odia king who fought against Ashok. And that side of the story has never been covered. Right? I'm delighted, that Brijesh ji is covering it. We need, and that doesn't mean that you're going to hate Ashok. Our mind doesn't work that way. Indians are open to multiple truths. And this is the freedom that comes when we aren't so tied to that concept. There is one truth. This is the truth. You don't accept it, you have to be cancelled. Okay? I mean, that's silly. It's completely un-Indian. At least it's a Western thing. Let's not import it here.
I love that thought, Amish. Thank you so much. Amey, how do you feel about this? Especially since you've actually worked on the history of the so-called mythology.
By the time this has come around to me, one part of the question has been entirely deconstructed. But keeping with that spirit, I feel like we understand, just as a thumb rule, we understand mythology either temporally. It is a part of time that we don't have a fully comprehensive understanding of, oral testimonies, etc. And then history is a more modern subject. So it's like incompleteness of information and periodization of time sort of gives us this distinction which is arbitrary between the two. But in the course of my research, what I saw was that mythology was almost an important way to understand history, because it is such an important part of society and its development over the years. And I'm not necessarily talking about the colonial interpretation of mythology that the two speakers before me have spoken about. I'll just give you an example. So for instance, my book was on a global history of the Ramayana. Now, this is a very important historical text. And even in the course of my own education, I did Homer, Iliad, Machiavelli, bunch of, Western texts, but never this very important text. And when I started looking at this text, what was interesting to me was, and the book is entirely about the export of the Ramayana outside India, the number of civilizations and cultures that adopted the text, which knew very distinctly that this was not their story. The rivers in the text were not theirs, the mountains in the story were not theirs, but still they accepted it. And it became part of that cultural DNA going back hundreds and thousands of years and played out in their polity. For instance, in Thailand, in order to get legitimacy, the king had to be Ram.
The ancient capital of Thailand is Ayutthaya.
Yeah.
It is Ayutthaya.
And all sorts of, interesting stories that were uncovered at that time, like the king of Upper Burma, when it was annexed, was sent into exile. And when he went into exile, he only carried his troop of Ram Leela with him, because he wanted to leave that message with his subjects that I will one day return. And he came and stayed 31 years in Ratnagiri. And then sir may know this, the SP's home today in Ratnagiri is actually the palace of King Thibao and the Polytechnic College. So, and just to come back to this theme, right, how these important historical texts are not just important in a purely revisionist sense, that we must reclaim our identities. They're also important to organize our modern life. One of the key things that the study of the Ramayana shows is that when this cultural transmission happened, it did not increase homogeneity between different cultures. It increased heterogeneity. The more cultures found out about each other, the more distinct they actually grew in their own directions. So we don't have to have this modern conception of cultural globalization where all of us need a McDonald's, where all of us need to have a particular type of political, social, cultural governance that gives us the claim to modernity. That there are in fact different types of organizing our social life that we can look back into our past and legitimize, not only for ourselves, but this project is equally important for the world around us. How do we exist in a plural, multicultural, multipolar world? Well, if you look back at Western history, I don't think you get a lot of good answers to that question. But if you look back at the history of the subcontinent, you do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amey. Tarun, a lot of your book weaves, so like Amey's work is a lot around, the history of, like I said, the so-called mythology and ancient wisdom. A lot of your work actually weaves, and the Portrait of a Secret is to me, it's the Dan Brown that we have to offer to the rest of the world, and so much better and more complex. It touches upon a lot of contemporary politics, slightly uncontemporary history, and a lot of memory of the land, right? So how do they weave in together into something that might be true and might not be true? And I'd love for you to comment on how it came about. Because clearly there was some seeds somewhere, right? So what were those seeds that became the tree that was the portrait of a secret?
So the seed of the story was actually an article in the Times of India. Simple as that. A brief column talking about two paintings that were stolen from here. And that actually was truth. Two paintings were stolen from an agricultural center in Delhi. We fought a protracted legal battle in London to recover them from the smugglers who had exported them illegally from here. But that was pretty much the beginning of that story. And it's just layering of that story thereafter which made it, as you have so kindly described it. But I think the larger point was truth is a very elusive concept, right? There is no universality about most truths today. I think the further along we go, what these gentlemen are alluding to, everything can be debated, everything can be fought over. So there is in history the possibility of interpreting almost everything that's happened with different lenses. And depending on who's telling that story, it could be told in many, many different ways. And I've just tried to tell a story slightly differently from how we've always understood our own history, whether it's in the context of Lal Bahadur Shastri, whether it's in the context of Nicholas Roerich, but just try and bring out each of their stories. And the larger interplay really is, there's no, we were discussing this in earlier panels as well, right? There is no one hero that dictates what's happening in the world. Stories come about because people are playing their roles in their lives, and it's that interaction that really makes a story. And that's what the portrait is an attempt to do.
Thank you, Tarun. In fact, when you actually study the hero's journey, and all of you have such are heroes and create fabulous heroes, there is an element, and alluded to it, the element of temporality, how these narratives have changed, shaped, and exist over time. Amish, you were talking about how we have these manuscripts, we have documented Itihasa. It was, and you're right, it's not just oral tradition. In fact, I mean, as we talk about, and it was documented tradition over generations. So the Mahabharata as we know it today is about 125,000 verses. And that was actually created over 7 generations of documented, written, philological tradition, where the first generation, the first Mahabharata was 25,000 words, and then it verses and became 125,000 verses across 7 generations in the largest epic. The question I have, Amish, is that there's the past, there's the present, and there's the future. And I'd really like you to comment on how is it that we lost ourselves, for the lack of a better, pains me, it hurts me, but I don't have a better term for this, that we lost ourselves. What happened?
The facts that you're saying are correct, but let me put a different story, a different interpretation to those same facts. When we began our path, and we lost, yes, for 1,000 years we lost to invaders. Many of our universities were burned to the ground. I think the Nalanda University, the destruction of the Nalanda University was perhaps the greatest disaster for mankind, because everything can be rebuilt, including temples. I mean, that library burnt for a month. There were that many manuscripts out there. Can you just imagine how much knowledge was lost? And not just Nalanda, Vikramshila, Ujjaini. How many Gujaratis here? Yeah, have you heard of the Ujjaini? Sorry, not Ujjaini. Sorry. What's the name? Vallabhi University. Yeah. Do you know it was founded by women? Vallabhi University. Around 1800 years ago, it was founded by women. Huh? We had that kind of women in India in those days. All these, yeah, we do. Many of those universities were all burned to the ground, right? And yes, we've lost a lot. But when we started our path to civilization, Egypt also started its path to civilization, right? Pharaonic Egypt. Mesopotamia also started its path to civilization. Are they around? Mycenae, which was the origin culture for Greece, are they around? No. They're all dead. They're all museum pieces. The only pre-Bronze Age culture that is still alive is us Indians. The only ones. You go to Egypt today, you ask Egyptians, what was your original name? I've done that with many Egyptians. They actually say Egypt. No, it wasn't. Egypt is actually their interpretation of a Greek word called Egyptos. Their own name for themselves, their ancestors' name for themselves was Khem. I'm shocked how many Egyptians themselves don't know. What was our ancient name? Bharat. Same name, coming down for thousands of years. We chant hymns today that were composed 7,000, 8,000 years ago. Yes, we've lost a lot. No doubt about it. The same invaders who went to those countries came here as well. Our ancestors fought a hell of a lot. We didn't just survive just like that. I mean, there are movies being made on how our ancestors fought these days. So the way I would see this story, is not that, oh, we've lost so much and defeatism. The way I would see this story is like a centuries of fierce resistance, of awesome bravery. The only ancestors who could protect their culture were our ancestors. Now the duty is for us to revive it. It's not a story of defeat, it's a story of the strongest resistance the world has ever seen. That's the way to see it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a story of actually heterogeneous amalgamation. Right? We've grown. We've amalgamated. We've survived. We are, you're right, as you rightly said, the only two unbroken civilizations in the world are the Chinese and the Indian.
And China is not pre-Bronze Age.
No, no.
China actually
China,
is around
but-
2000 BCE,
Yes.
from what I know.
Yes.
So pre-Bronze Age, matlab minimum 5000 years old. Yeah.
Yes. And so therefore, Brijesh, आपने जब पहले बात करी थी, you alluded, not alluded, but you're very determined that we will establish ourselves. We will not be called mythical and fantastical, and we will not be trivialized. We will not be dismissed, right? How would you like us to be back? What would you do? What can we do? What do we do?
See, if you read Macaulay's Minutes on Education, 1935, he says that the whole content of Persian, Sanskrit and Tamil literature is not worth a shelf of English literature. From there, they go on to create an education system wherein right from Ayurveda to our traditional knowledge systems, everything is denigrated to our traditions, customs. You remember, we all grew up in schools, and if we put a tilak or something, we used to face punishments in school. What kind of country we live in? Now we have to begin with this. We have to begin with the education system. So we have created Macaulay's automatons. And first of all, we have to get rid of this Macaulay project, and we have to begin with our education system. And I understand that there is no original scholarship, and that too is by purpose. The British took away the manuscripts. You go to any British museum, it's an empire of loot, right? And these people took away all our manuscripts, everything which was not allowed for us to interpret. And whenever they interpreted it with a colonial lens, with a Eurocentric lens. Even while, let's say, looking at a mega king like Ashok, they looked at him from a very Eurocentric lens. They looked at our society in that sense, and all this then became our tools of understanding ourselves. So my first understanding is that we have to break these tools. We may not have tools now, we have to make our tools again. And that is where we should begin. And then we should re-educate ourselves. Till we re-educate ourselves and we do not break these tools, we are going to look at the world as second-class citizens. See, I go to a lot of tech talks and I tell people that open your phone, look at all the apps. See, any app, 90% of the coding must have been done by Indian engineers. Why don't we come up with a product? Why don't we come up with an operating system? Why don't we come up with a large language model? Within 6 to 8 months of GPT and OpenAI coming, China had 40 large language models. We don't. Why don't we attempt? So this emasculation of mind, this epistemic violence, it has totally belittled us in our own eyes. And first of all, we have to challenge that. We have to deconstruct that. We have to break those tools of interpretation. We may be stupid, we may be whatever, but we will make our own tools of interpretation. We will learn our own past, whether it's glorious or not or whatever, but we will interpret it. We will not go by the paradigms which have been given to us. And the whole British project was with a particular purpose. They looted $45 trillion, and there are idiots who tell us, oh, but they gave you railways. They gave railways because they wanted raw materials. It was not an act of charity. And the British Empire was also the biggest drug trader in the world. They destroyed China. They annexed Hong Kong just because China basically resisted against sale of opium. They annexed in 1840, they simply annexed Hong Kong. So imagine this, that this is the kind of project which was for almost 150 years. Till we were studying, 1857 was called Sepoy Mutiny, right? Even today, if we talk in alternative voices, people would laugh at us. There are WhatsApp groups where I am, there. And if I put something like that, there are 1,000 people who, would attack. And okay, it's good to have alternative interpretation. They are welcome. And look at the beauty of our thought. In Jainism, there's a concept called Syadvad. It's about truth. Syad is Shayad. It says whenever you talk about truth, say Shayad ye sach hai. Right? That is Syadvad. That we are open to multiple interpretations. And as Amish has said, that we don't have a project that, okay, this is what you have to bow to. If you don't, you're finished. Same like this. Look at what US aid is doing to us. It is the same colonial project. Look at cancel culture. Why should somebody tell you that you have to interpret the world this way? Or people who colonized, enslaved, raped, burnt, they are telling us humanity, human rights, right? They are teaching us. It's really comic. And the first project we should do is to deconstruct this.
I'd say the good thing is it's happening already, right? The work these
Yeah.
gentlemen do, they're already writing about all of this fantastic stuff from the past. We did get it whooped out of us in 200 years that the British were here. But I think now, especially under this government, we are finding our voice again, which is nice to see.
Why this conversation is also very interesting is because since yesterday, and the Indian Navy is a collaborating partner with us, and we're doing the event, the Max City Valley of Words Litfest is actually in collaboration with the Indian Navy and the Maritime History Society. And yesterday, one of the first conversations that we had, so I want to allude to two conversations. The first one is what Brijesh is talking about, and the fact that whatever is happening to the rest of the world, our colonial training would protest, but our civilizational memory, our blood, Bharatiya DNA, might actually approve of this breaking up of norms, this emergence of the new order, might actually be very good for us. The other theme that we've been talking about, and with this, Amay, I come to you, we've been talking about the Indian Ocean and the extent of the Indian Ocean, and how it is that there is an ocean, the only ocean that's named after a nation, right? And I went back into our roots and did some research, and I realized that in our scriptures, we've always had the Hind Mahasagar, and then we had the Prashant Mahasagar, right? The Pacific Ocean. We had names for them. If we had names for them, we knew about them, we traded with them, we expanded with them, right? So therefore, Ame, especially as part of your research, while Brijesh is talking about us reclaiming ourselves and deconstructing our narratives, the question I have for you is that as part of your research, what were those large themes that you emerged where we can really express ourselves and emerge as the owners, not just soft power, but just as the owners of identity? What is our gift?
Firstly, just to summarize, I think one of the important themes that shouldn't get lost in what the previous panelists have said is the incredibly difficult project of colonialism. How do you bring subjecthood to a civilization that is so culturally rich? And that's why their project had to be so immersive that even after 75 odd years, the decolonial project is still ongoing. And it's not also a coincidence that this is happening at a time where India is rising. Power is so important to this entire conversation around culture. And in that context, the Indian Ocean is very interesting. So much of India's culture, I mean, in the late 1990s, there was an economic recession in ASEAN. So ASEAN countries were facing a bit of a cultural crisis, keeping people together, especially, the democracy was a flexible concept in these countries. They didn't want something like the Arab Spring to happen. So the ASEAN countries got together and started a program called Realizing Ram. And this is one of the great things about India's cultural exports. They have happened perhaps entirely in the absence of any kind of structured effort. And you had troops, the shadow puppetry is a particular form of theatre that is practiced in these countries. And you had these troops, even recently when the Prime Minister, I think, went to one of the ASEAN countries, this was performed, the shadow puppetry. So they used the story of Ram to create cultural cohesion in a time of upheaval. And the history of the Indian Ocean is littered with such stories. And coming back to what I said earlier, I think the great success of this is, while this cultural transmission has happened, no other country in Southeast Asia has felt threatened with India's overreach, its military coming to its shores, colonizing it, hegemonizing it, that there is perhaps the Indian Ocean is the only example in global history of cultural transmission happening without a hegemonizing project that underlies that cultural transmission, where both cultures have been able to enrich themselves and in ways that we would not imagine. So, for instance, 3 of the Ramayans that I came across, very interestingly, were Islamic Ramayans. And there's the Mindanao people of Philippines, which are the only Islamic majority village in the entire country, which is a Christian majority country, are the only people in all of Philippines who have an independent history of the Ramayana, which is the world's only Ramayana told from the perspective of Ravan. So all these transmissions and diffusion has happened in various cultures. And so there is perhaps a model of globalization here that we can take ownership of. When we talk about Vishwaguru, we are not talking about it in the Western sense where someone has to go and sermonize and tell the indigenous how to step into modernity. This is about reclaiming a past in which we already have that grammar. We already have, so for instance, something like democracy. Is democracy something that begins in the West and only comes to India in 1947? Are those values, are those dialogues absent from our history? In fact, if anything, it wasn't in the American Revolution, it wasn't in the French Revolution, it's the Indian Revolution that brings democracy to the world, where most of the global South is looking at New Delhi in this moment to see if, a culturally diverse, a people so poor, lost all their property, can still come together. And there is something to be said about a culture that can hold that concept after so many years of loot and plunder, as has been highlighted.
Interesting point you raised about democracies. So if you look at pre-Magad, like pre-6th century, you had 16, Mahajanpads, Anga, Vanga, Kalinga, Pundarasim, Matsya, God, and the names of officials we still use, Ayukta, Adhyaksha, they were the names that were still used 2,500 years back, right? So, and these are people who are teaching us democracy today. I mean, what kind of joke is that?
Even with having figured out the past and how we've gotten to where we've gotten, and the present of where we are reclaiming ourselves, we are reestablishing ourselves, we are already present in ourselves. हमारे महावाक्यों में मतलब there are these 2 Maha Vakyas, right? And I'm building upon what Ami, Shamay, Brijesh and Tarun have spoken. एक है तत्वमसि, कि तुम जो हो बहुत अच्छे हो, I bow down to the divinity within you. But the other one and the bigger one is Aham Brahmasmi. The fact that I am the infinite divine within myself and all I need to do is find myself. And therefore, having reached here, my question to you is about the future. So my question is, as the bureaucrat and as the diplomat respectively, how do we step into ourselves in terms of Aham Brahmasmi? And more importantly, what is it that now engages you for the future? What do we have to look forward to, both personally, as your personal projects and as your Bharat projects?
May I go, because I have a 3:15, so I think for India, this is perhaps the most exciting time to be an Indian in the last many centuries. When we became independent in 1947, the received wisdom was India wouldn't survive, and Pakistan would, because apparently they had a uniting concept. We chose to be secular. We have more Muslims in India than in Pakistan, and we survived. So the political project worked. The fact that we chose to be a democracy in 52, it was thought to be a completely stupid idea. It worked because there is a historic memory. Then economically, because as Acharya Chanakya had said rightly, essentially it begins with artha. Sukhasya moolam dharmaha, dharmasya moolam artha. If there is no wealth, if there is no power, everything else is theoretical. In the late 1980s, the US car industry made more money than all of India. We were that poor. Our GDP was smaller than just Ford, General Motors and Chrysler. We were that poor. Today, we just last year, we crossed our former colonial master, the UK. Another few years, we'll be number 3, okay, which is where we were around 600 years ago. Now we got to get back to number 1, which is where we were around 1,000 years ago. We have a few decades to do that. It's such an exciting time to be an Indian. And along with that is the cultural revival that will happen. Much of the old order is breaking down. The old order wasn't really in our interest. So I don't think we should, we should mourn the loss of the old order. How the new order will emerge is up to us. And yes, to the point that Amay made, I think that's a very good point. What kind of country will we be? Because yes, we fought many villains and colonizers and invaders. But I think a wise man had said that the biggest risk in fighting a monster is not that you lose. It's in that you will win and become a mirror image of that monster. And that is the key thing we Indians have to bear in mind. We should not become a mirror image of the monsters who oppressed us. Then we'll be insulting our ancestors. Is this what they fought for? We didn't force our culture on anyone. We attracted them. We had a very different approach. And that didn't mean that we were these non-violent, doormats. No. We never went to conquer anyone else. But if you came to our land, try to invade us, if you slapped us, we wouldn't turn the other cheek, we'd freaking box you back. But we won't box first, right? That balance, that's what I think we need to revive. And that's what the next decade and a half will be. All of us should get into that cultural project. I'm writing books, I'm hosting, producing documentaries, I'm working on a video game, a proper AAA PlayStation type video game that will come out in 2026. The first AAA video game based on an Indian subject, based on the Ramayana. Working on a movie, doing podcasting. It's such an exciting time to be in the Indian cultural space. Bharat Mata ki jai.
Bharat Mata ki jai.
Okay, I have to rush.
Yes, thank you, Amish. We will excuse you. We'll miss you, but we will let you go. Thank you so much, Amish. So while we had to let Amish go, and I know, Brijesh, I asked you this first, but I'm going to come back to you later now, because there were some thoughts that Amish left behind that I'm going to come back to Tarun and Amay for first. Tarun, in the context of what we're discussing right now, we've discussed the seed of what got you to the portrait of a secret. What are the saplings that are now emerging? What are we looking forward to? What are we waiting for from you?
I don't know how much of that fits in the context exactly, but the portrait has shown me stories from the past that I hadn't heard of before. It's shown me stories about Indian intelligence, which is fast becoming a topic of passion for me. And I think it's a story worth telling. I say this often, and I don't mean to jinx it, but if you think of the last 10 or 15 years, we've actually been fairly at peace. Incidents are fewer and further between, which to me is a victory for Indian intelligence. I think we deserve our own James Bond. I think we deserve our own Clancy's and our own Pattersons as well. Why are we so enamored with the CIA and the KGB? We can do our own work as well. So that's the large part of the storytelling that I want to do over the next few years.
I love this, and I'm sure that we're looking forward to this coming out. Now that I've given that plug, my sponsors needed me to. What are because it's such a wide scape that you've covered, because the Ramayana is indeed, it's like the intel inside. It is the cultural DNA, not just for India. And honestly, it's not even an Indian story any longer. Mere Ram. Right? I was in Bali very recently, and despite the fact that Indonesia is predominantly an Islamic nation, Islam-dominated nation, the fact is that all their symbols of democracy, their symbol is the Garuda, Vishnu's general. Democratic principles are actually designed around the Panchashila. The logo, the slogan that they have is actually Tungala Bhinneka Ekka, which is unity in diversity, very inspired from us, right? And this I discovered when I went there. A lot of us, as in a lot of India, exists today in the world outside. Whether we recognize it, articulate it, call it or not, you don't have to ever call out an intel to know it's there. But what were those things or three top things that really excited you about wanting to know more about, that intrigued you enough?
The first thing is, one of my pet peeves nowadays is, I used to go to a lot of academic conferences, right? And a lot of papers that people present are often the International Telegraphic Union in France in the mid-17th century to tell you, a larger story about how the world should function today. Something very obscure, archaic. And every time I would go with, let's say, even 100-year sweep of Indian history, the first question I would get asked in the audience is, but does it really apply to us? So there is this, I think, as this project of reclamation and revisionism is ongoing, one of the things that I do feel that has to happen is to be able to take these histories and reclaim those conversations and those spaces as well. And be able to say that, okay, actually, if you look back into even obscure portions of our past, there are perhaps very interesting solutions that are possible for problems elsewhere in the world. And I don't necessarily even mean the global south. That these problems, I am in fact writing a paper now on how methodologies of diversity can be adapted to reread Western texts. So, for instance, you have this story of America as the unipolar movement, this Leviathan, and you read into that and you say, okay, how should a hegemon behave? And I look at America's behavior in this century to tell you that. Now the world is approaching a period of multipolarity. Are there periods of Indian history that I can go back to and draw out good lessons, patterns of behavior, structures to understand the world that we are now entering into? Because something very unique is happening, right? India and China are where the power shift is happening. These two countries, two powers have not had their seat on the global high table for thousands of years. Now they are going to be at that table.
And yet they're the OGs.
Yes. So it's a very interesting transition period. And I feel like once this project of this revisionism, this reclamation of cultural identity is over, I'm very excited about taking these ideas and insights abroad. You know, to take the example of Bhopal Municipal Corporation and tell them how the water problem in Virginia needs to be fixed. You know, things of that nature.
Thank you, Aman. I'm so tempted to talk to you, ladies and gentlemen, about the work that we do at ACOM, which is really in the same space, and we want to come back and explode onto the world stage. The whole relationship between the body and the mind, which we understand so well, on health, on management structure. So I am just so excited, Aman, about what you're doing, and really, really looking forward to your work, and saving my favorite best for the last. Brijesh, what are we waiting for? What are we baiting our breaths for?
To start with, you talked about the dichotomy between Tattvam Vasi and Aham Brahmasmi. But if you look at the story of Shwetaketu, when he breaks open the seed and finds nothingness, then that is Brahma. And that Brahma is same Aham Brahmasmi. So there is a continuum there. That there is Brahma in everything. That Brahma is the seed, that Brahma is you, that Brahma is the universe. So there is no dichotomy, and hence this is the Indian thought, which is, all encompassing, and it's very fluid. Taking a point from what Amish said, that about look at our cultural values. We never colonized anybody, we never raped anybody, we never beheaded anybody, we never converted anybody, and we had the largest empires in the world. Whenever we have not been colonized, whenever we have not been, ruled by others, we have been 25 to 30% of the world trade. That has been our GDP strength of this land. See, at more than 300 million hectares, we have the most arable land in the world. Yeah, so we are a fertile bowl, and still we have been having periods in history where we were, subjugated in every way. And now, when Alexander came here, Alexander never stepped in what is India today. He went back from what they call Hydaspes. So the banks of Jhelum, he went back because he was told that there are 10,000 elephants with Magad. The Magad Empire was so huge at the time that Alexander's army revolted. It said, we are not going to fight you. And we have to understand what we were. Despite being this, no Magad king went out raping others and killing others. Right? Nobody did that. The war as it was fought was a dharma yuddha, that no standing crop was ever touched. People were not killed. Houses were not burnt. And at evening, everybody, like government servants, used to put down their arms. Right? And eat and marry. So what I'm saying is that these civilizations which are trying to conquer and teach us today are in their infancy. See, Varanasi is a living city, 5,000 years of continuous inhabitation. Varanasi is older than history itself. And every time we are discovering new things. People told us that Aryans invaded. Now the Aryan invasion theory is gone. I am not saying that all civilization emerged here, but you look at, there have been certain DNA evidences from Harappan civilization, and you find cultural continuity. So let us not be bamboozled by what is told to us. Develop tools of interpretation. And our first, project as a country should be to develop our tools of interpretation. And what I want to do, I want to fight this huge demoralization of the soul. That we can't make a product, we can't make a large language model, we can't make a GPU, right? We can't make philosophy. What original work of philosophy, art, anything that we have done in the last 100 years? Hardly anything. There is nothing original that we are doing. And there is so much talent in this country. Like, I meet around people and I'm amazed, right, at the brilliance, the sheer brilliance of Indian mind. Whenever I have interacted with foreign delegations, I have found that we as Indians, we know much more. So, years back, I used to be, I work with police, so I used to be, Deputy Commissioner of Police of the South Bombay. And many European police officers used to come and they used to try to teach us policing. We were looked down upon. Okay, these are people who don't understand policing. So my office was just opposite the VT station, which is CST now. And I used to take them to the window and I used to tell them, look out. They used to say, what's happening there? I said, look at this. This is a railway station. There's one more called Churchgate, right? And 6 million people pass through trains in my jurisdiction. What is the population of your country? इतने तो हम ट्रेन से भेज देते हैं भाई. तो तुम क्या सिखाओगे आपको, right? So first of all we have to, ये हमने जो हमारे ऊपर सईस बैठा हुआ है इसको उठा के फेंकना है. जो महावत हमारे पास बैठा हुआ है colonized mind पे, इसको निकाल के फेंकना है. We have to develop our own tools and hence we have to see it is there. R&D, हम लोग कोई R&D नहीं करते. How many papers in AI we are writing? How many papers in cyber security we are writing? How many original products we are doing? Till we do not respect ourselves. Go to Japan. Right? The respect they have for themselves, you feel. Go to France. The respect they have for their bad food, and their language and everything is what we don't have. So we should learn first of all to respect ourselves. Till you don't respect yourselves, nobody is respecting you. And this is my life project. That I'll just digress and tell you that I've been doing this for long. So how many of you have seen this Akshay Kumar movie called Baby? Right? So I was a consultant on that movie. And why I worked with the director? Because everybody used to think of police as pandus, of our agencies as useless. Hamara raw, hamara IB, nobody used to think ye log kuch karte. Lots is happening. Lots is happening. Aap FBI ye dekho, you see FBI in a movie, some dramatic music, some classical music, Rise of Valkyrie starts and you feel that something great is happening. Not with our agencies. So I worked on that project and I said, let's change the way people look at our agencies, look at our forces. And I think from there you see that various things started. And that is my project, to open up this thought process in your mind that you are what you are. I'm not saying that you are the best in the world, but first of all, find what you are. The way Hanuman ji ko Hanuman Chalisa sunaya gaya tha, ki what you are, and then, Hanuman ji became, from a monkey, Hanuman ji became Hanuman ji, after being, told who he was. And that is what needs to be done with India.
Thank you so much. But having thus established the fact of who we are, where we are, why we are, how we already are complete, fulfilled, and present within our own selves, and all we need to do, and I love that analogy, Brijesh, is be the Hanuman and discover that we are not Vanars, but we are indeed the Pavan Putra Hanuman who can conquer the world and langhu the oceans, right? So with that, I, ladies and gentlemen, open this up to you. We have time for 3 questions. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. So I've been reading Mahabharata, which is the English translation currently, on by A.R. Krishna Shastri, you might be aware. So I wanted to understand that whenever we read translations, there is some amount of author bias which comes in. So how important is this to read the original text? And if you can suggest which language I should refer read the Mahabharata.
Does anyone want to take this?
So I can empathize.
Okay.
So shared problem, but just
Just recite the first verse of the Mahabharata.
Please go on.
Yes.
नारायणं नमस्कृत्यं नरं चैवं नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं चैव ततो जयमुदीरये. My name is Harsh.
Harsh. Thank you, Harsh. And just from my experience in the work that I've been doing for the last decade and a half, a good version. So, of course, there's the Gita Press original Mahabharata in Sanskrit, fabulous. In Hindi, it's translated well. If you want to read in English, Dr. P. Lal ki ek series hai, Writers Workshop ki, which literally transliterates.
In Indian language, or it's like, should I go to Sanskrit and learn Sanskrit and pick up?
No, that's the best thing to do. But otherwise, the Writers Workshop version of the transliteration of Mahabharata is actually a good one, if that helps.
just wanted to make a quick point on that.
Yes.
The Arthashastra was only discovered in 1905 and then only became popularized when it was translated. And we were asked many moons ago, I was asked to write a paper on war strategy. And the only two options were Sun Tzu and Clausewitz at that time. So I chose to write on Colonial. And my professor called me in when they corrected the essay. They called me in. Christopher Coker, he passed away unfortunately. He said, "I've never heard of this war strategist that you have spoken of." And I said, "So we only reclaimed him in 1905, so it makes sense."
We'll wait
and then
for you, yeah.
He went into an existential crisis. He said, "If we had lost Machiavelli and Hobbes for 1,000 years, God knows where Western civilization would be." And that's where we are.
Yes.
So, for this Arthashastra, there are wonderful versions. Sham Shastri and Kangle both have done different kind of works. And in fact, my work, Cloud Chariot, it recreates Arthashastra based administration. All the names of officials, ranks, hierarchies, functions. So I have tried to recreate an Arthashastra based administration here. But you'll be surprised that Arthashastra is also not original. It's possibly a compilation done by Colonial. And it was originally Brihaspati Shastra. So most of the principles of Brihaspati Shastra, and Brihaspati Shastra was also a compilation. So it's quite an ancient text which was basically compiled.
Thank you, Brijesh. Yes, sir.
I just have a comment. I don't have a question as such. I think what we must understand is that the world will respect us if we are good at what we are doing. The world, all throughout in the history of mankind, has always respected people who have been able to prove themselves. And as far as heterogeneity, it is extremely important for our society. Our society has survived this millennia because of heterogeneity. We talk about people coming from outside, people coming from inside, etc., etc. Please understand that the heroes that we talk about, Kanishk, etc., they were Kushans, they were Shans. They were not exactly what we call the subcontinental India. We should not also carry some false ideas about the unadulterated glory. We are where we are because of certain things what has happened in our country. And even today, we talk about Japan, we talk about Europe. There are two things that we must keep in mind of any society's sign is the public toilet and the traffic behavior. We are good at it, people automatically will start looking at it with respect. Let us understand heterogeneity is good. We go to Bali, we see the ketchup dance. It's a 99% Muslim country which is still promoting Ramayana. We have spoken about the Ramayana part. Now, as far as India as a civilization, of course we are a civilizational entity. We will be progressing. But the Cholas and the Pandavas, and as far as even the battle which happened in 1043, they all had violence. Violence is part of power. It will happen. Whenever we have to progress, there will be violence, there will be peace, there will be all kinds of things.
We know this as a civilizational memory. Can I have a round of applause for that, please? Thank you for your commentary. Is there one quick question? Last. I'm promising last. Yes, Colonel Kale, and then last, Amitaji.
While we speak about Sanskrit and it being an ancient language and all that, but there was a popular belief, and I think it is partly true, that the Pandas and the Pandits and everyone else kept everything in Sanskrit because they wanted to keep the larger population ignorant, and they were probably the only interpreters, and they would probably control the narrative and have an equation with God. Your take on that? Because while it was an ancient language, it was not the spoken language.
I mean, others on the panel probably understand Sanskrit much better, but let me just give you an example. I was reading this paper, I forget the name of the author, on the abolition of sati. And this period of time where the British come to India and they need to administer cultural difference, regulate it. And that becomes a problem because they don't really have one single text to refer to. And so the Manusmriti and other texts that become part of this process. So this is fairly, at least in my understanding, fairly recent, when key locals were made interlocutors of empire and certain texts were given precedence over others as a way to regulate an incoherence which was entirely foreign to the British. And so even if something like sati, etc., had to be regulated, then you needed certain class of people who would interpret those texts. These rituals and practices, at least in my understanding, are more recent than our memory allows us to accept. Perhaps it's just one instance.
I know Amish is not here and I know he works a lot in this space, Colonel Kale. So let me come back to you with a very detailed answer on this one, and I promise I will. Amitaji, that's absolutely the last.
I don't have a question. I have an apology to tender and a word of gratitude. Apology because I have been brought up in a very anglicized way. I didn't realize how ignorant I was. I didn't know about Bharat. The moment of truth happened to me some 20 years ago when I learned that man called Macaulay reported to the crown that the only way to make us slave was to break our spine because they are very evolved, there is no beggar, they are self-sufficient, they are spiritually we will not be able to conquer this country. Let's just break their spine. When that happened, I went through a depression. I read that and I went through a depression which lasts till today. I am thankful because I said, why did Max City happen to me when I was growing up in an anglicized way? Thank you. You got that right. I would have been of some service. People talking about this Jane Austen novel and then this penicillin. What about our wealth? I couldn't defend us. And I feel very sorry because the realization has come to me when it is my life 2.0 or probably life 2.3.
Our children are also, don't worry.
So I want to say thank you, and if I can be of any service to be able to be a voice or spread the message to anybody and everybody, I am available.
Thank you so much, Amitaji, and that is why, Amitaji, we exist. The Max City Valley of Words Litfest exists, and hopefully we will all do this together. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your words, and thank you for your knowledge.